Mr. Goldberg, good morning to you, and sorry for keeping you waiting so long.
No problem. Good morning to you and your viewers.
Now, since the Mineral Resources Ministry intervened in the wage negotiations, they have expressed confidence in finding a solution in the wage dispute, but Amcu says they haven't received any new offer. What do you think is happening here, and what's the situation there?
I think there's quite a bit of politics going on in respect to that negotiation. It's gone on for a long time. And, you know, through natural attrition of time, these wage disputes and strikes will always break at some particular point in time. I think the concern that a lot of us have as analysts is that there's a lot of violence and intimidation and, of course, deaths taking place. So the real question is a proper strike taking place? In other words, can people freely go to work in that environment? And we know the answer to that is no, because we've had lots of violence, deaths, and a lot of damage to property. And I think that's the question we got to look at as South Africans is what do we put into place in strike situations where there is violence and intimidation to this level? What is the consequence? And if you look at internationally, the consequence is ultimately these strikes become unprotected and workers become vulnerable in respect of potentially losing their jobs in these situations.
Now, we don't know the exact detail of the new offer on the table, but Amcu is suggesting that this is not a new offer.
My understanding, it is a new offer because clearly when the minister got involved, there was a new offer tabled, and that's why I think people are talking to the media with different stories. Ultimately, I think the minister is right. He took a risk getting involved in trying to get the parties together, but the parties would be at a position where they either are going to have to come to their senses or else the strike will continue until it breaks. The real question I have is, I'm saying operationally, I think some of the marginal mines are in real trouble. And operationally, I think for some of the other mines, we get into the scenario, I think, very close to dismissal, even in terms of our own labour law, where the right to strike is enshrined.
Now, has the involvement of the Mineral Resource Ministry brought any hope, really, in the talks?
I think there was hope last week that a settlement could be reached, and I think it's very close to that kind of settlement, a settlement being reached. And, I think in any protracted strike, there needs to be significant compromises from both parties. I think the one telling factor, if obviously the mines could afford to pay more, they would have paid more by now and not lost 21 billion rand and continue to lose hundreds of million rands per week, as was in your news announcement.
How practical do you think, though, is Amcu's demand for the 12,500 rand in the platinum as well as in the gold sectors?
Well, I think the gold mining sector, which you alluded to in your cast, is a different scenario. There, the majority trade unions are NUM, UASA, and they've got a majority agreement with the employer and extended it to Amcu, and that's what that court case is about. There was an interim order interdicting the strike, making it unprotected, and now it will be a final order, and I think it will go that same way in terms of saying a majority trade union or two trade unions acting together to form a majority can extend their agreement to the minority trade union. That doesn't infringe necessarily your right to strike, because your right to strike and any of other constitutional rights are limited to what's fair and free in a democratic society. And our labour law, which was a negotiated law, allows us to conclude majority agreements and extend them to minority trade unions. Otherwise, you'd have chaos. You would never have settlements in sectors.
Now, moving on to Amcu's bid to embark on that strike in the gold sector, if they eventually do succeed in their effort to strike there, what impact do you think that will have on our economy? Because already the platinum sector strike is weighing very heavily on the economy.
My view is if you've got a strike where you allow people to come to work freely, then there's no problem. The strike will then break and people who want to come to work can come to work. In the gold mining sector, the majority of employees have elected to sign the wage agreement through their trade unions. So that would imply, even if Amcu could get this court application right, that they could go on strike, which I don't think they will get right. I think the law is clear in my view that a majority trade union can extend an agreement. But let's assume they could. One would assume that the majority of workers want to work. And unless there were high levels of violence and intimidation, one would think that the majority of people would come to work, and therefore, if there was no violence and intimidation, it would have very little effect on the gold mine.
Now, going back to the platinum strike over the weekend, the minister said that he will pull out of the talks if the parties do not come to an agreement this week. Is that maybe a sign of confidence that the deal is imminent, or that the minister has realized that there won't be a breakthrough anytime soon?
I think the minister is correct, and he cannot just sit there week in and week end out in terms of trying to get the parties to conciliate. it's either got to come to a head or else the natural processes must continue. In other words, the employers have the law to deal with in terms of whether they're going to go down operational requirement dismissal, and the employees have to elect them whether they want to come to work. What we all hope and pray for is an environment conducive to allow people to come to work. Because I think in a lot of our strikes at the moment, we're not having that environment conducive to allow people who don't want to strike. And that's my view, is that the sections in respect to strikes and labour court powers should go back to the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee to look at a ballot, to look at extra labour court powers. I think that therein lies the solution. The labour court in these circumstances can declare a strike unprotected. It happens in many other jurisprudence throughout the world, and I think that's what's potentially needed in South Africa. A full ballot in order to go on strike, as well as some court powers in cases where strikes just become operational dysfunctional, as this one has.
Mr. Goldberg, thank you so much for your time. That was Labour analyst Jonny Goldberg giving us more analysis on the Amcu's bid to embark on another strike in the gold sector, as well as the platinum sector that's going on currently.